Hello, everybody. So today I'm going to do the Politiscales political spectrum test. So I had done this a couple months back, but someone had wanted me to redo it, and in particular to do it without choosing neutral, which seemed like a good enough idea. So let's go through this and see what kind of result I get, shall we? A good policy is a pragmatic policy without ideology. I tend to agree with that. I think a lot of public policy, well, it should be broadly guided by values, is not something that morals has any particular insight into. Like as I've said, I don't think the church really has any particular insight into economics. Obviously, any economic program should be based on and keep in mind Christian principles, but at the same time, um, they don't really understand how the market works or any of that kind of thing. So stuff like that, how welfare policies work, that kind of thing is best left up to technocrats. Members of a nation or culture have some unchangeable characteristics that define them. Well, I mean, obviously they do. They can change over time. Like, the reason they have different biological characteristics is a result of specific evolutionary pressures, like how Europeans have much thicker torsos to better insulate themselves, and Africans have longer limbs to better disperse heat. So that evolved in regards to the environment, but practically speaking, those things are going to change anytime in the foreseeable future. Hormonal differences can explain some differences in individual characteristics between women and men. I love how this is like even a question. Because I remember when I was I was getting treatment for my depression, the doctor sent me to get a testosterone test because low T levels are often linked to depression. Mine were above average actually, but the fact that like they look into that as a medical procedure and it's not like my doctor's edgy or anything. I don't know. Preserving non-urban ecosystems is more important than creating jobs. Generally speaking, I tend to agree with that. As I've said in the past, when you're talking about blood and soil conservatism, you have like the animals, like the Bengal tiger is kind of integral to India. Lions are integral to a lot of African countries, or elephants. You need to preserve these. So I'm going to go with strongly agree. If two economies have similar economies, social systems, and environmental norms, then the free market between them has no negative impact. Free trade works when it does work. If the two countries are roughly at parity, then there isn't really that much of a problem. I mean, there's certain industries you'd want, if not necessarily nationalized, controlled by the government, like arms production. Food needs to be fairly closely regulated, at least basic foods like cereal crops. But generally speaking, I think it's fine. The issue with the what happened with the EU is like it would have made sense if they just had Germany, France, uh, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, and the Scandinavian countries because they're all at similar development levels. But like bringing in Italy and Greece and like Eastern Europe was a mistake. Mass strike is a good way to acquire new rights. I'll agree to that. It generally seems to work. Some sectors or types of employment should be financially supported. Well, obviously. I mean, how else would you have a police force? I guess you could have a private police force or some meme like that. And I'm assuming they mean publicly supported. No one should get rich from owning a business, housing, or land. As opposed to like, how else would you get rich? I guess like through wage labor. I guess maybe they're talking about speculation in terms of housing or land, but speculation can be dealt with involved with a land value tax. So I'm going to strongly disagree. A language is defined by its users, not by its scholars. I'm not supposed to take neutral for this one, so I'm going to say more. It's more by users, so I'll somewhat agree to that. Social assistance deters people from working. This is another one I'd like to pick neutral on because it really depends upon the situation. I think it depends what people in question. I think if we're just saying this is purely a factual statement, then yes. That's not to say that like social assistance to mothers so they can stay home and take care of their kids isn't important, but I'm going to agree with that. Revolutions will always end up in a bad way. Uh I don't think that's the case. That would imply that every society on Earth, most of which have gone through revolutions, are bad. And I guess you could make that argument, but I don't really agree. The fact that some schools and universities are private is not a problem. I don't really like private schools or universities because I'm not really that much of a classist as some people are. So I don't like it. That might just be from growing up around a lot of public school teachers and public school administrators. Also, just in the case of America, they're so outrageously expensive, especially given how in America certain schools are highly favored over others. I'm going to disagree with that. Space colonization is a good solution for supplying the lack of material on Earth. Strongly agree. Research produced by a country should not be available to other countries. Um, I think it depends. I'm not really against sharing like medical research, but some technological research or military research. I'm gonna slightly. This is another one I'd like to put neutral for, but I said I'm not going to put neutral. So maybe somewhat agree. The categories of men and women are social constructs that should be given up. Obviously, strongly disagree. Transgender individuals will never really be of the gender they would like to be. Well, considering, and I apologize for this, when men transition to so called women and they have their dicks chopped off, they have a device called a dilator. And they have to dilate their whole, I think daily or every couple days, or else it'll heal shut, and they'll die of septic shock because their urine can't get out. So, yeah. The influence of religion should decrease, easy when it should increase. Energy and transportation structures should be a public matter. Yeah, I think when it comes to things that have very large economies of scale, because energy kind of has to be a monopoly given like how the power grid's set up. I guess you could have multiple energy generators, but even then, I think that would be very hard to track. So I'm going to agree with that. The filing and storage of personal records should be delimited strictly, and database cross-checking should be forgiven. I don't really understand that, but if that's a general web privacy question, I support web privacy. The labor market enslaves workers in some cases, but overall, it's better. Theoretically, it's as beneficial for workers as it is for employers. Now, it doesn't always work that way depending on the economy, but you can go to a different company and make more money or get different living conditions. If there was no labor market, you wouldn't really be able to change jobs. So I'm going to strongly disagree with that. It is necessary to massively invest in research to improve productivity. Strongly agree. The police should be armed as opposed to not being armed. I'm going to agree with that. Actually, I'm going to absolutely agree with that. I mean, they kind of do. But it depends a bit on the country, I guess. Like in America, you're going to send them into inner cities without guns. Yeah. The right to be anonymous on the internet should be guaranteed. Yes, I agree 100% with that. Looking for one's own profit is healthy for the economy. It generally speaking is. I mean, capitalism, or rather, maybe capitalism is kind of a loaded term. Market economies work, and command economies don't work. The fact that when you introduce the profit motive to a command economy, it automatically starts working much better. Like China's economy has a lot of problems, but I don't think it's arguable that once they introduced aspects of private enterprise, it really started to function way better than it did when it was just a command economy. So I'm going to agree with that. I do not have any problem if other official languages are added or replace the already existing official languages in my country. I'm going to strongly disagree with that. We have English and French here, and that's just the way Canada is, and that's the way Canada always has been. Disagree. Selfishness is the overriding drive in the human species, no matter the context. I'd say an aggregate, yes, it is. Banks should remain private. That's a difficult one. I think what we have in Canada, where they're public, but they're private, but they're very regulated. I'm gonna slightly disagree because I think in some countries they need to nationalize the banking sector. Social differences between ethnic groups cannot be explained by biology. Strongly disagree. Sexual orientation is a social construct. Strongly disagree. Changes in an individual's way of life can induce changes in society. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the whole point of my book, No Chance. It's before you can heal the world, you have to heal yourself. So, strongly agree. Offshoring and outsourcing are necessary evils to improve production. This is very difficult. I mean, there's certain industries you have to offshore just because it's not possible to onshore them. Because maybe the climate's not there, or there's other certain conditions that make it important. Also, some other countries just have natural advantages, either comparative or um, absolute advantages. At the same time, though, it's led to a destruction of the working and middle class. So I'm going to slightly disagree. Loans contracted in the public sphere, region state collectives, should not necessarily be refunded. I'm going to agree with that. That makes sense to me. Patents should not exist. I mean, then why would there be any incentive to create things? I mean, I hate pharmaceutical companies as much as the next person, but the amount of money it takes to do R&D, they kind of have to have a patent to recoup their losses. Now, could there maybe be more cost control, like they get a longer exclusivity on it in exchange for lowering prices? I don't know, but patents need to exist. Revenues and capital should be taxed to redistribute wealth. Once again, it's kind of a difficult one, but I'm going to somewhat agree. The age of retirement should be lowered. No, the age of retirement should be raised as life expectancies are increasing. The maximum allowed hours in the legal work week should be increased. No, I think they should be decreased. And maybe that sounds kind of contradictory to what I just said like 5 seconds ago. But I think with like modern technology and how much more productive people are, you could probably lower it to a 35-hour work week and just have people work 4 days a week for slightly longer. So I'm going to disagree with that. People need to stand up for their ideals, even if it leads them to betray their country. Well, I mean, I'm betraying my country by doing this channel, so I agree with that. Minimum levels of salary should be ensured to make sure that a worker can live off his or her work. I mean, I'm going to agree with that. It's better than just giving people money. People kind of need something to kind of keep them going and that they can focus on and develop. So I'm going to agree with that, I think. Reduction of waste should be done by reducing production. I mean, that's in some cases, yes, but in a lot of cases, I think there's a lot of gains to be made through efficiency or reusing or recycling things. So I'm going to slightly disagree. Exploitation of fossil fuels is necessary for the foreseeable future, yes. Heavy penalties are efficient because they are dissuasive. I would tend to agree with that. My religion must be spread as widely as possible. Yes, all the world must acknowledge that Christ is Lord. We need to establish a monarchy to federate the people and preserve our sovereignty. I'm not particularly monarchist, so I'm going to disagree with this. The main goal of a couple is to make at least one child. That's not the only goal. I mean, there's also companionship and that kind of thing, but I largely agree with that. Foreigners enrich our culture. Disagree. It is necessary to teach history in order to create a sense of belonging to the nation. 100% agree. We need to make compromises with the opposition to apply our ideas. I'm going to disagree with that because we've been doing that for like the last 100 years and it seems to have almost never worked, so I disagree. Justice should always take into consideration the context and the past of the condemned and adapt their penalty accordingly. I actually agree with this. I'm more into probably restorative justice or rehabilitation than a lot of people are in these circles. I think prison is by and large cruel and unusual punishment, and I would prefer either we use like more liberal use of capital, corporal, or financial punishment rather than putting people in rape cages with other convicted criminals and expecting them to somehow come out well adjusted. So I'm going to agree with that. Activism in existing political organizations is not relevant to change society. I mean, there's so many counterexamples to that. I'm going to disagree. We should accept changes in our way of consuming food to limit the exploitation of nature. Yep, I agree with that. Elections organized by the state cannot question the powers in place. I mean, that's kind of the ideal for me, because ideally it would just kind of be, I guess, a one party state. And if you had elections, it would be either multi candidate elections or to just select local representatives and then you have indirect elections. So I tend to agree with that. I'm equally concerned about the inhabitants of my country and those of the other countries. In my case, I am because Canada sucks. So I'm going to say somewhat agree. Nuclear fission, when well maintained, is a good source of energy. Strongly agree. It is merit that explains the difference between the wealth of two individuals. That's not true. To a certain extent it is, but its merit isn't something necessarily earned. It can be something you're born with, it can be due to luck or circumstance. There's all kinds of things that go into creating wealth. Euthanasia should be authorized. This is a difficult one. Euthanasia is a lot more difficult than, say, abortion as far as social issues go. I'm kind of biting the bullet on this one, as I do personally in my heart of hearts think there are cases where it probably is permissible, but I think it's a slippery slope and I think it's a precedent and it's a path I don't want to go down. So I disagree. State-run companies should be managed like private ones and follow the logic of the market. Generally speaking, I don't see why not. Is it is legitimate for a country to intervene militarily to defend its economic interests. This might be one of those random cases where I'm kind of moralistic that goes against the other cases where I'm not moralistic, but I'm going to disagree with this actually. I don't know if economic interests are enough of a reason to intervene militarily. The state should be abolished. That's silly. All sciences, even chemistry and biology, are not absolute and are subject to being shaped by our society. When they're like not done with a political agenda, and I get that everything's impacted by politics, but the amount of politicization that neoliberalism has caused is kind of unprecedented. So I'm going to strongly disagree with this. Sexual assaults are partially caused by men's natural impulse. If there wasn't a natural impulse, like if men weren't like horny all the time, they wouldn't be causing sexual assaults. Like it's like saying overeating is caused by man's natural hunger. Of course that's the case. Transhumanism will be beneficial because it will allow us to improve our capacities. Now, I've actually kind of changed my mind a bit on transhumanism. I used to be super against it. Now I'm kind of soft for aspects of it. Because there's a lot of potential benefits, like better prosthetics, improving people's lives, curing diseases, correcting maybe if someone has a learning disability or something like that. I think there are ways to ethically enhance humans, so I somewhat agree. Market economy is optimal when it is not regulated. I mean, market economies are optimal, but they need regulation, so I disagree. It is important to encourage an agriculture that maintains a food biodiversity, even if the output is inferior. Yes, I've seen many times when in the past monocrops don't work. Nowadays, employees are free to choose when signing a contract with their future employer. I mean, they have the illusion of choice. You really can't negotiate contracts unless you're in a really advantageous position. So I'm going to somewhat disagree. Citizens should take priority over foreigners. That's the reason the state exists. Prisons should no longer exist. I actually kind of agree with this. I think you should be publicly like you should be corporally punished, have to pay a financial penalty or do some sort of state service or service to the person you wronged or just executed. I don't like prisons. The values of my country are superior to those of other countries. No, Canada's values are horrible. Sabotage is legitimate under certain conditions, yes. Violence against individuals is never productive. That's definitely not the case. I forget his name. There was that guy who assassinated the socialist politician in Japan, and the Socialist Party fell apart after that, so I'm going to disagree. Foreigners living in my country should be allowed to act politically equally to those who have the nationality. Strongly disagree. Environmental norms should be influenced by mass consumption and not from an authority. No, because you need authoritarian, you need some sort of higher authority to solve the tragedy of the commons, so I disagree. It is a small group that consciously and secretly controls the world. Now, I don't think it's secret, and it's not just Jews or whoever you want to say. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the various like super rich and like politicians and all that like they meet openly, like at the Bilderberg Group or like there's all kinds of these international organizations where extremely powerful people meet and discuss their common interests. So it is a small group of people. It's not really secret though. Changing the system radically is counterproductive. We need to transform it progressively. Um, at this point, I think you need dramatic change. Insurrection is necessary to deeply change society. It generally is. Um, the political incentives in place, at least at this point in history, tend to incentivize violence. So I'm going to agree with that. It is acceptable that some industry sectors remain private. Of course it is. Conditions of life in jail should be greatly improved. Agree. Wage labor is a form of theft from the worker by companies. No, it's a stupid idea. It is acceptable that there are rich and poor people. Yeah, I mean that's just kind of the nature of the world. Does that mean that like some a couple people should own all of society's money and the rest of people are virtual slaves? No, there's but in general it's fine. The sacrifice of some civil liberties is a necessity in order to be protected from terrorist acts. I actually strongly disagree with that. Most terrorism, other like a terrorism doesn't really kill that many people. It's kind of like a media circus that gives that impression compared to like the number of people who are shot daily in a city like Chicago. Also, a lot of most terrorism comes from like diversity is our strength. And I don't like the Patriot Act. I don't like any of this government surveillance, so I disagree. Armed struggle in a country is sometimes necessary. Agree. Abortion should be limited to specific cases. As I've said, I don't think it's practical to ban abortion in the case of rape. I think if you ban just elective abortion, it's something like 99 plus percent of cases, so I can live with that. The social roles of men and women can be explained by biological differences. Well, let's think about this for a minute. Can women have babies? Yes. Can men have babies? No. It is necessary to implement assemblies to ration our production to the consumers according to their needs. I don't even really know what that means, so I'm just going to disagree with that. Multiculturalism is a threat to our society. Yes. We must fight against global warming. I mean, I'm on the fence about anthropogenic global warming. But if they mean like a general reduction in pollution, then yeah, I agree with that. Maintaining strong economic growth should be an objective for the government. It's not the only objective, but it's theoretically at least a good thing. Borders should be eventually abolished. Strongly disagree. Schools should mostly teach our values, traditions, and fundamental knowledge. Yep. One is not born, but one rather becomes a woman. I mean, I guess you're not, girls aren't born able to have children, they like grow into it, but that's not what they're referring to, so I disagree. We should always distance ourselves from protesters who use violence. At the current point in time, it's not productive, so I'll somewhat agree. Nobody is by nature predisposed to criminality. Strongly disagree. It's better to arrest some potentially dangerous people rather than taking the risk of having them commit a crime. Yeah, I think you have to arrest subversives. In specific conditions, the death penalty is justified. Yes. Order and authority should be respected in all circumstances. I disagree. It has to be moral authority. Marriage should be abolished. Strongly disagree. The purpose of the judicial system should be to punish those who went against the law. I mean, there's many purposes of it. That's part of it. But I don't think punishment is really the primary goal, at least in my view. I think deterrence is the primary goal, so I kind of disagree. GMOs should be forbidden outside of research and medical purposes. I disagree with that, actually. Individuals who get out of prison should be accompanied in their resurrection. I guess? I don't really know what that means. It is necessary to avoid private monopoly. In some states, yes, I'm going to agree with that. Homosexuals should not be treated equal to heterosexuals with regards to marriage, filiation, adoption, or procreation. Absolutely agree. Humans should neither eat nor exploit animals. Absolutely disagree. Cow is delicious. A good citizen is a patriot. Once again, I'm kind of bound on this one because I'm not patriotic for Canada, so I'm going to disagree. Dismissal of employees should be forbidden except if it's justified. I mean, sometimes a business has to downsize. It's kind of like saying dismissal of employees is forbidden except when it's not forbidden, so I disagree. Transforming ecosystems to increase the quality of quality of life of human beings is legitimate. I generally place humans above nature, but I think in general they're often the same. Like, not burning down the rainforest helps both humans and nature, so I somewhat agree. It is not acceptable that human actions should lead to the extinction of species. I generally agree with that. National chauvinism during sports competitions is not acceptable. I mean, sports are supposed to be basically a proxy for war. Differences of treatment and quality of life in our society show that racism is still omnipresent. I mean, it does. Not the way they think it is, but I'm going to disagree, because that's not what they mean. It is important that health should stay a public matter. Agree. It is necessary to remove regulations and labor legislation to encourage firms to hire. I mean, it depends on the regulation, but I'll disagree. Activists must always act in strict accordance with the law. Strongly disagree. Technological progress must not change society too quickly. I somewhat disagree with that. It depends. If you have a new vaccine, you want to implement it. So I'm gonna strongly disagree with that one. Also, do we really should they have gradually phased in electricity, as opposed to coal? No. Hacking has a legitimate place in political struggle. I'm gonna agree. My country must pay for damages caused by the crime it committed in other countries. I don't know. I didn't disagree with that, I guess. Biologically, human beings are designed for heterosexuality. Yes. Traditions should be questioned. I mean, you should evaluate everything. So I'm going to agree with that. Abstinence prior to contraception to preserve the abstinence should be preferred to contraception to preserve the true nature of the sexual act. Yep. It is unfair to set a minimum penalty for an offense or crime. I don't know, actually. The problem is our judges often kind of suck. But there could be a lot of like certain circumstances, so I'm gonna somewhat agree. Okay, fatherland, work, family. So I got 98% essentialism. I got rehabilitative justice, conservatism, I guess kind of moderate nationalism. Uh, I actually got mostly capitalism, regulationism, productism, and revolution, which is kind of interesting. So let's see what other badges I got. I think that's you think there's a conspiracy, maybe. So let me just take a screenshot of this. So this isn't really surprising because I do believe pretty strongly in the market economy. I just think it has to be properly regulated. Um, I am kind of an illiberal progressive, so productivism being above ecology kind of makes sense to me. Although I kind of view it in different terms than how it's described here. Essentialism being that high is pretty funny. I do tend to prefer rehabilitative justice. Nationalism versus internationalism is kind of in the middle. Overall, though, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Pragmatism, missionary. Okay, so I hope people enjoyed that. God bless.